Hi, I'm Haley, and welcome to the first installment of Time Travel History. Today, we're going back to 1969 to learn about the riots that set off the gay rights movement, the Stonewall Riots. No one could have predicted that a standard little police raid of a bar on January 28, 1969 would set off arguably the most important battle of the gay rights movement. Breaking the status quo and fighting for the rights of the LGBT community are two ideals that bind the Stonewall Riots to the American identity. Now, I've got my time-traveling penny board, so let's get going. Looks like we landed a bit off course, but no matter. I'll explain the events that led up to Stonewall while we walk to the right place. To start off, there was essentially no resistance to the oppression of the LGBT community before Stonewall, and all homosexual acts had no protection from the laws. All homosexual acts, as well as cross-dressing, were illegal. At its peak, 500 people a year were arrested for crimes against nature, and 3,000 to 5,000 per year were arrested for soliciting or loitering. Homosexuality was seen as a mental disorder or sexual psychopathy. One facility for treatment was Ascatero in California, where medical experiments are done on gays sent to the facility. One drug stimulated the feeling of drowning and was essentially medical waterboarding, and lobotomies were seen by some more extreme doctors as a so-called cure for homosexuality. New York acted as a safe haven at the time for the gay community, especially one sector known as the Village. The Village was home to thousands of poor and homeless gay youth at the time. In the Village, the Mafia controlled the gay club and bar scene. There was no competition because only the Mafia was able to pay off the police to keep the bars running. The Mafia would steal the alcohol used in the clubs, water it down, and then sell it. They also owned everything in the bar and had a large gay client base that had nowhere else to go, so the profit was enormous. These bars acted as a refuge for homeless gay youth who had nowhere else to go. The events leading up to the Stonewall Riots created the perfect storm of outrage to prompt resistance. The LGBT community had taken part in past revolts for black civil rights as well as anti-war protests. This activism led to distrust and even hatred of the police. They also showed people in the LGBT community that demonstrations and protests could lead to change. A re-election campaign for governor of New York created a strong campaign to clean up the streets, leading to increased police raids. The Village was a main target of the campaign. Hey look, the Stonewall. Inside, and I can finish up this boring background so that we can get to the good stuff. Look at this retro TV I found in the Stonewall. It's pretty nifty, right? Anyway, let's get back to the history. In addition to the raids and strict laws, the middle class had no sympathy for the gay community's struggles. There was a lot of propaganda preaching the dangers of homosexuality.
Ralph was sick, a sickness that was not visible like smallpox, but no less dangerous and contagious, a sickness of the mind. You see, Ralph was a homosexual.
America thought we were these homosexual monsters, and we were so innocent, and oddly enough, we were so American.
That's a little odd, but okay, well, let's keep going. Gays were regularly beaten and even killed, which is pretty similar, if you think about it, to the previous lynchings of blacks in the South. But that just goes to show the major theme throughout U.S. history of cruelly treating and oppressing those labeled as other. You may be asking, but Haley, what makes the Stonewall Riots so special? Well, you see, the raids were pretty unusual. You see, most raids would take place when the bar wasn't very full, because the Mafia would just pay off the police to get a tip-off. But the tip-off for the raid on June 28th never arrived. So the bar was a full house. There had also been a raid a few days prior. The Stonewall Riots were nights of pure chaos. The police were not nearly prepared enough to raid the Stonewall this night. There were only 6 police officers in the raid at the Stonewall, which seems odd but was quite normal for the time.
Gay people were never supposed to be threats to police officers. They were supposed to be weak men, limp-wristed, not able to do anything.
The police's unexpected raid and the large amount of people in the Stonewall attracted a crowd that grew to enormous size and played a major role in the riot's success. To everyone's surprise, the people in the Stonewall began to resist the police, something that had never happened before. Men refused to show identification, and cross-dressers refused to go to the bathroom to verify their sex. The police were pushed out of the Stonewall, and fighting began to escalate, helping to grow the crowd even more. Hundreds of people in the gay community showed up to fight. The cops quickly became wildly outnumbered and were unable to call for backup due to a radio malfunction. Buses full of tactical police finally arrived after a few hours. The police used their shields to push the rioters down Christopher Street, but the protesters marched back and actually managed to push the police back down the street, and then began to surround them. The riot went on for hours and devolved into pure chaos.
So it was mostly goofing, really, basically goofing on them, getting them in the car and rocking them back and forth, calling them names, telling them how good looking they were, grabbing their butts, doing things like that, just making their lives miserable for once.
A group of drag queens even started a kick line and began to sing.
I mean, the riot squad was used to riots. They were not used to a bunch of drag queens doing a Rockettes kick line.
Windows of shops were smashed and people were beaten with police batons. Tires were slashed and garbage cans were lit on fire and thrown. Street kids had nothing to lose and were running on repressed rage from years of degradation and oppression. Police eventually retreated, signaling the end of the riots for that night. However, that was not the end. The riots continued for the next few days, and 5,000 leaflets were distributed documenting the events of the riot on the first night. The Mafia reopened the Stonewall the next day as a challenge to police, and more people outside of the LGBT community began to come. Members of both the Black Panthers and anti-war protesters participated in the following riots, which happened to be quite lucky for the LGBT community, as the police were much more brutal the next 2 nights. When using their batons, they started to aim for the head instead of the back or the legs. Tear gas was also used in an attempt to stop the protesters, but caused the gay community to fight back even harder. The riots were described as more of an uprising than a riot, due to the changes that came around because of the events at the Stonewall. Despite being the first real LGBT resistance to oppression, the riots received almost no media coverage.
Leave this place, Time Lord. Return to your era.
I think we should probably listen to the mysterious voice and head back to 2018. I can finish up the effects of the Stonewall riots there. Looks like I'm back in 2018. The most important part of the riots was their aftermath that united the LGBT community and made their cause more popular with the public. As one protester put it, "It's very American to say, that is not right. It's very American to say, you promised equality, you promised freedom." And in a sense, the Stonewall riots said, "Get off our backs, deliver on the promise." These American ideals served as a basis for the riots. I messed up that. These American ideals that served as a basis for the riots helped to encourage support for the gay rights movement. Before Stonewall, the Mattachine Society was the very first gay rights organization. Their goal was to repeal the legislation making homosexual acts illegal, but not to further the human rights of LGBT people. The riots united the community under a common purpose, furthering gay rights. One protester said, "We had discovered a power that we weren't even aware that we had. We became a people." After the riots, the gay community knew that they had to follow up with something big and make use of their chance to create change, so they decided to hold a protest march through the streets of New York. This was the beginning of the yearly pride parades that still take place to this day every June. The march gave the gay rights movement a direction and a glimpse into what the future might hold for them. The Gay Liberation Front was later formed as a national group that advanced the goals of the Mattachine Society, but was more united and widespread. This organization served as a foundation for present-day gay rights organizations. In short, the Stonewall Riots served as a catalyst to skyrocket the issue of gay rights into the mainstream and showed just how American the so-called homosexual monsters were. I'll see you in the next installment of Time Travel History.